All right, so now that we have our first Webby document created without any filters, now we are going to go back and start adding filters. So this portion of the recording is all going to be about adding filters to your documents. Now, how do I go about it? I need to modify the query. So I need to go to data access, edit, and it brings up the query. Now I need to build some filters, right? So let's start with a very simple first filter. So let's say I want to only see data for the year 2006. So I can either go here and grab the year object and bring it here, or since the year object is already there in the result object, I can grab it from here as well. And then I brought it to the query filter panel. By default, it creates a condition, and that condition has an operator by default, which is in-list. But there are other options as well. So you can pick equal to, not equal to, greater than, less than, so on. So there are many different operators that you can pick. I'm going to keep it to in-list, which is the default. And then this is where you provide an operand, you provide a value. So I can either type in a value, I can say 2006, or I can select from a list of values, or I can create a prompt. So we'll worry about prompt later. If I type something, always remember that there is a slight risk on how the data is stored in the database. What if the data is stored with an extra space here, right? So if there's an extra space in the database and you're not going to get data. What if you type in an extra space here, or you type in an extra space here? If that happens, then again, you're not going to get any data. So whenever you're typing a value, just be mindful of these things. I would rather select from a list of values if the list of values is available than typing it. The other thing that I'll mention is, what if you want data for 2 years? So if you want data for multiple things, more than one, then the separator is a semicolon. The separator is not comma. If you put comma as a separator, then it's not even going to consider it as a separator. It's going to consider it as part of the data. So anyways, I only want 2006. So first I'm typing a value, then I'm going to select. So for now, I'm going to run this. And then when I run it, of course, I have to bring the year object to see the effect. So now you can see that I only have 2006 data in my report, which means the data provider only has 2006 data. All right, so going back, now this time instead of typing in, I'm going to say select from a list of values. It automatically runs a distinct query, gives you all of the results, and I can either double click to select it or highlight and move using this button and say OK. And then I can show you, actually, if you select multiples, then as I said, it shows up with a semicolon. Okay, so anyways, so going back, I'm going to remove 2005, say OK, and rerun it. And you can see that it works either way, whether you select or you type. If you have a choice, I would rather say that select from a list of value than typing it. Okay, so that's one condition that we built. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to build another condition. Okay, so the second condition, let's say that I'm building, is on the state object, and it happens to be up there. So I'm going to grab it from up there, and then I am going to change the operator this time to equal to, and then I'm going to again select from a list of values, and then I'll say Florida. Now, so Florida moves over here. Now let's say if I pick Colorado and try to move it here, notice that it's overwriting it. It's not adding it, unlike the last time, right? Any new value that I select, it overwrites it. Why is that? Which means it's only letting me pick one. it's not letting me pick multiples. It's because I'm using equal to. So equal to and in list, the difference is when you use equal to, you can only have one value on the right hand side. When you use in list, you can have multiple values. Okay. So that's one thing. The other thing is, now that I have multiple conditions, notice that by default it ends the conditions. If I, for whatever reason, I want to change it to an or, I can click on this and it changes to an or. Click on it again and changes to an and. Okay, so a few little things here that I've talked about. So multiple conditions, anytime you have multiple conditions, the conditions are going to be ANDed by default. You can change it to an OR. If you use in list, you can have multiple values provided. If you use equal to, you can have only one value provided. How does it all look like in terms of SQL? So when I view script, notice that now there's a where clause. That's where the conditions are applied. Okay, so now if I run this, it's only going to give me 2006 and California. Okay, so far we have built two conditions, and these conditions basically restrict the data. Anytime you build condition, the idea of building a condition is you are going to restrict the amount of data that you get back in your query or as a result of your query. Now, is it a good thing or a bad thing to have conditions? If you ask a DBA, they will basically kill you if you run a query without having conditions, because you are not supposed to bring back millions and millions of records from the database. So it's always a good thing to run your queries with only the data that you want without burdening the database, right? So otherwise you're going to, if everybody starts running open-ended queries without any conditions, then the DBA is going to be really, really upset. So anyways, and if you guys remember, I've always said this, in business intelligence, DBA is your best friend. Okay, and I have had a couple of students who told me funny stories about their interviews, and this statement got them through to the next round or got them the job. I mean, I from time to time I share these things from my experience in the class, and somebody came to me and said, "Sir, I had an interview and I said this thing in the interview that DBA is your best friend, and I ended up getting the job." So remember these things, because these things are important in the BI world. You don't ever want to run an open-ended query and piss off the DBA. Anyways, so edit the query again. I have two conditions here. The question for you is, how would you build a condition if I tell you to give me the sales revenue for California for 2006, which this is already doing, and for Florida for 2005. So the question that I want you to think about is, I want sales revenue for California for 2006 and for Florida for 2005. How would you go about building it? So think about it, and then I'm going to move on and I'll show you how you can build it. So some of you may be thinking, well, two of the things or one of the two things is already there. It's California for 2006. All I need to do is Florida and 2005. So maybe why not bring in another condition here on the year object, and this time around I'm going to pick 2005, and then get another one on the state, and then say Florida, right? So these two were giving me California in 2006 anyways, or sales revenue for California for 2006. These two will give me sales revenue for Florida for 2005. If that's what you're thinking, that's not what the result is going to be. I can run the query and then explain. So if I run the query, what happens? It says no data to retrieve, query 1. So remember, if you get no data to retrieve, it is not an error message. It is only telling you that you have some conditions in your query which is not bringing any data back, or you have something in your query which is not bringing any data back. So this is not an error message. When this happens, typically you can edit and you can figure out what is causing this to be the case. It's probably one of the conditions, or it's one of the joins or something else. Anyways, so this of course did not work. Why it didn't work? Because when you have ANDed conditions, it is kind of like going record by record across the data, and it's saying, okay, I'm looking for a record where the year is 2005 and it's 2006 as well, right? So are you going to find a row with year 2005 and 2006 both at the same time? No. When you AND, that's what it's looking for. The year is 2005 and 2006 both at the same time. And it's looking for a record where the state is California and Florida both at the same time. So of course you're not going to find it. If I click on this and change it to an OR, that still doesn't serve the purpose, because we are looking for sales revenue for California for 2006 and sales revenue for Florida for 2005. So if I change it to an OR, everything is ORed. So it's anytime it's going to find 2006, whether it's for California or not, it's going to say, okay, I want this record in the result set. So we actually don't want an AND or an OR. This is where we learn how to build nested conditions. So clearly in the question, the first two are paired together and the last two are paired together, right? I hope everyone agrees. So how do I pair them together? You can grab this condition and drop it on the first condition, and you can grab this condition and drop it on the third one. So now you all of a sudden you have a nested condition. So first two are nested, the last two are nested, and everything is ANDed together. Again, if I run it as is, I'm not going to get anything back because everything is ANDed together. So would you agree that the first two are ANDed? Sales revenue for California for 2006. The last two are ANDed. And then this needs to be an OR for the problem that I'm trying to solve. So now when I run it, I will have sales revenue for California for 2006 and sales revenue for Florida for 2005. Okay. So let's save this report. I'm going to say save as, and then online class second Webby document, and I'll say save. Okay. So now edit the query again. So this is how you build nested conditions. If you look at the SQL, this is how the SQL looks like. So you have the where, and then you have this ended with this, or, all right, I mean, you can follow it along. You can follow the parentheses and all of that. Now that we are done with nested conditions, I am going to ask you to tell me how you would build this. So let's say I want the sales revenue for California for 2005 or 2006. I'm going to get rid of these two guys. So I want sales revenue for California for 2005 or 2006. How would you go about building it? So one option is I'm going to build the nested way, just like I built it before, right? So I can say, well, the first part is sales revenue for California for 2006. I'm going to bring in another state condition. I'm going to build in another year condition, and then I'll keep California and then 2005. That would be okay as well, but there's a better way of doing it as well. So I want sales revenue for California for year 2005 and 6. Why not I change it right here? So I can have multiple values, and when you have multiple values in an in list, it is equivalent to an OR. So you basically are saying I need sales revenue for California for 2005 or 2006. That's what you're saying. So unnecessarily, if you add an OR, it may slow down the query, but this essentially is doing the same thing. So when I run it, you will get sales revenue for California for 5 or 6. Okay. All right, so the last thing in this part of the lecture that I'm going to do is to build prompts. So I'm going to build a few prompts, and then I'll save the report, and then I'll show you something called refresh on open. So let's say that these conditions that I've built, I'm going to remove the second condition. So I've built this condition, and this condition is basically it's a hard-coded condition, right? So when I run this report, I get this data, I've saved it. Now, as a user, not all users will have options to modify the query. There are two kinds of users in a company. There are users who can build reports, and there are users who only consume reports. So if I am one of the users who can build reports, yes, I can modify the query. But if it's a query published to production environment, I'm not going to be modifying it every single day. So what about the users who can't even modify it? They can only refresh the query. They just come in and they say refresh, and that's it. That's all they do. So right now there is a hard-coded condition which is only giving me data for California, right? What if they want data for Florida or they want data for some other state? So they are not going to be able to do it because the condition is hard-coded. So when you build production-ready reports, typically you don't put hard-coded conditions. Instead, you kind of build prompts. So how do we build prompts? I'm going to change it from a constant or value from list to a prompt. When I say prompt, notice that one extra button appears here. And when I click on this button, then it tells me, it gives me a few options. So one, it says what is a prompt text. The text for prompt by default is enter value for state. So I'm going to just say, I can modify the text. So I'm just going to say enter state. And then there are a few parameters here. One of the parameters is prompt with list of values. So do you want the users to pick from a list of value, or do you want the users to see the list of values? Then this option select only from list. If I select this, then the user is not going to be able to type anything up. They have to select only from the list. Then this option keep last value selected. I'll show you when I run the report, and then this makes the prompt optional. So I'm gonna keep it unchecked for now, say okay, and then I run the report. So now this time when I run the report, you don't get the data, you get the prompt. There's a red arrow sign next to the prompt because this prompt is mandatory. So unless I provide a value, you cannot run the report. So the other thing is you don't have any place where you can type in a value. You have to select from a list. So I selected from the list. If you want to search, let's say the list is too big and you want to search for something, that's where you search, and then you say okay. So now when I provide a selection, that's when the report runs, right? So the difference is when you have prompts, then when you run the report, it gives you the prompt window, and unless you make the selections, the report doesn't run. So since I selected Colorado, now I have the data for Colorado. Now, if I refresh from right here, what happens? The report is built with the prompt. So when you refresh, it's not going to run the report. It's going to basically, it's going to run the report, but since it has prompts, it is going to bring up the prompt window. So now, because one of the options that we selected was keep last value selected, you can see that Colorado is still there. And since the value is selected, it says, yep, you have at least one value selected. So I can select something else and then run it. Okay. So now I'm going to edit the query and modify the prompt. And then I'll say uncheck keep last value selected. Say okay. Rerun it. When I do that, then it doesn't keep the last value selected and I can pick any value I want to. Okay, so these are a few prompt parameters. So I'm going to now save this report. And I'll say online class third Webby document. Okay, and I'm going to close out from here. So these are my 3 documents that I've created. I'm going to open this document again. And as soon as I open the document, what happens? You have the data from the last refresh. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's neither, actually. You Sometimes it's okay to get the data from the last refresh, but sometimes it is not okay to get the data from the last refresh, because what if this report had confidential data? And if this report had confidential data, then somebody can open it and see somebody's SSN or salary or date of birth or something like that, right? So in certain situations, when you do not want the data from the last refresh, how do we avoid it? So when I refresh this report, of course, I can pick something else, but I mean, somebody would not even get to that screen because the report is open with the data from last refresh. So how can we fix this? To fix this, the easiest solution is you basically just say file save as, and then when you're saving this document, there's this option called refresh on open. When you select this option and save this document, now I'm going to close this and then open it again. So since I selected refresh on open and this document is built with prompts, what happens when you have a report which is built with prompts and you try to refresh it? It brings up the prompt window. And even if I move the prompt window, I cannot see any data from the last refresh. So if you are dealing with confidential data, it is not a good idea to display the data from last refresh, and the solution for that is refresh on open. So when you say refresh on open, it doesn't show you any data. Even if I save this now, exit out, open it again, boom, no data, right? Because saved with refresh on open, every time you open the report, it's going to try to refresh it and no data from the last refresh is going to be there.